Millionaire walks in on his new cleaning lady breastfeeding his baby daughter. What he does next shocks everyone. Hi, my beautiful family. Let's begin with a heartfelt prayer. Heavenly Father, please place your healing hands upon me and shower my amazing YouTube family with peace, love, protection, and unexpected blessings. Fill their hearts with joy and their homes with grace. Amen. This is your Mr. Peter. Can I take 30 seconds of your heart? For the first time in years, my channel faced two painful mistakes. Day 1, background noise. Day 2, a silent gap. And now YouTube is pushing us down. Maybe you've felt this in life, when you're already low and more goes wrong. I am not blaming James, but I think he's not taking this responsibility seriously. If yes, then you understand. Please, motivate me in the comments. Your words matter. Your prayers matter. And if you're going through it too, let me remind you, storms pass, but strong hearts like yours and mine, we rise, always. To all our new family members, I see you with my heart. Welcome home. This space was built for love, and now it's yours too. Please introduce yourself in the comments. Let me know who you are. I truly care. If you find my videos on other channels, please know they are not real. This is our home, our love, our story. Help protect it by reporting those fake pages. Before the story begins, I ask you gently, please don't skip it. One like, one comment from your heart can save this family and keep our stories alive. James is standing with you while I heal. Now come close, and let's dive into today's story. It's full of soul, crafted with love, and just for you.
Some moments shatter your world so completely that you can only stand witness to the beautiful destruction, knowing that nothing will ever be the same again. The grandfather clock chimed 11 times when Scott Kenzel pushed through the mahogany doors of his estate, his Armani suit wrinkled from another 18-hour day. At 34, he commanded respect in boardrooms across the Midwest, but tonight the silence of his mansion pressed against his chest like a weight. He loosened his cufflinks, expecting the familiar emptiness that had become his companion since Celestine's death 8 months ago. The baby monitor in his jacket crackled with static. Little Evangeline had been crying when he left at dawn, her tiny face red with hunger that formula couldn't satisfy. But tonight something was different. Soft humming drifted down the curved staircase, not electronic buzzing, but something achingly human. Scott's shoes fell silent against the Persian runners as he climbed toward the sound, his heart performing an unfamiliar rhythm. The nursery door stood slightly ajar, warm lamplight spilling into the hallway. Through the gap, Scott glimpsed a scene that stopped time itself. A woman sat in the antique rocking chair, her dark skin luminous in the soft glow. She wore the simple navy uniform of the cleaning service, a woman he'd never seen before, since the agency had sent replacements after Mrs. Pemberton retired. But she wasn't cleaning. In her arms, nestled against her breast, was Evangeline, his 8-month-old daughter who had screamed through every feeding attempt, who had lost weight despite the pediatrician's best efforts, who had driven 3 nannies to quit, was nursing peacefully, her tiny fist curled against the woman's brown skin. Scott's breath caught. The woman was breastfeeding his child. The stranger's voice rose and fell in a melody he didn't recognize, words too soft to distinguish, but heavy with emotion. Her free hand traced gentle circles on Evangeline's back, and for the first time since birth, his daughter looked content. The floorboard beneath Scott's feet groaned, and the woman's head turned toward the door. Their eyes met through the gap, and Scott saw something that made his chest tighten, tears streaming down her face, even as she continued to hum. She had been caught in an act so intimate, so deeply maternal, that Scott felt like an intruder in his own home. But instead of stopping, she held his gaze with dignity that spoke of someone who had nothing left to lose. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice carrying the musical cadence he'd heard in her humming. She was crying so hard, and nothing would calm her. I tried everything else first, I swear. The bottle, the pacifier, walking, rocking, but she was starving. Scott pushed the door open slowly, movements careful as if approaching a wild creature that might bolt. The woman shifted as if to rise, but Evangeline made a small sound of protest. "Don't," Scott said quietly. "Don't stop." He moved to the window seat across from the rocking chair, far enough away that he wouldn't intimidate her, close enough to see his daughter's face. Evangeline's cheeks, hollow for weeks, already looked fuller. Her skin, which had taken on a grayish pallor that terrified him, glowed pink with health. "How long has she been like this?" Scott asked. "About 20 minutes," the woman replied, looking down at Evangeline with profound tenderness. "I found her in her crib, crying so hard she could barely breathe. The bottles were prepared, but she kept pushing them away, and I thought maybe she was still hungry. Sometimes babies need this." Scott studied the woman's face. High cheekbones, full lips, eyes the color of dark honey that held depths of pain he recognized. She couldn't be much older than 28, but carried herself with gravity of someone who had seen too much. "You have children," he said. It wasn't a question. The woman's hand stilled on Evangeline's back, and fresh tears spilled over. "I had a daughter. Hope. She would have been 8 months old now. She died 4 months ago. Heart defect they couldn't fix." The simple words hit Scott like physical blows. Here was a woman who had lost her child, still producing milk meant for a baby who would never need it again, giving that gift to his daughter who was slowly starving. "That's why you can," he said softly. "Your daughter was crying the way Hope used to cry when she was hungry, and my body remembers. It still thinks she's coming home." They sat in silence, broken only by Evangeline's soft sounds of contentment and the whisper of the rocking chair. Scott watched his daughter's face relax into peace he hadn't seen since before Celestine died. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Tori Styles," she replied, shifting Evangeline to her shoulder to burp her. The baby complied immediately, then settled back to nurse. "I started with the cleaning service 3 days ago. This was supposed to be my first week here." "Supposed to be?" Tori's laugh held no humor. "I assume you'll be calling them in the morning to have me replaced. I know how this looks. I know what I've done is inappropriate." Scott leaned forward. "Tell me something, Tori. In your professional opinion, because I assume you've been around babies before, how long has Evangeline been failing to thrive?" The directness seemed to surprise her. She looked down at the baby who had fallen asleep against her chest and considered carefully. "Her muscle tone suggests weeks of inadequate nutrition," she said quietly. "Her reflexes are sluggish. Her color was poor when I found her. If I had to guess, I'd say she's been slowly starving since birth." "Hasn't she?" Scott's jaw clenched. 8 months. Every pediatrician, every specialist, every formula on the market. Nothing worked. She screams through every feeding, throws up half of what she manages to keep down, and she's lost 6 ounces in the past month. "Some babies can't process formula," Tori said softly. "Their digestive systems aren't mature enough, or they have sensitivities that don't show up on tests. They need this. And you can provide this." The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to name. Tori's hand resumed its gentle circling on Evangeline's back. "My body produces enough milk for 2 babies," she admitted. "It has for months. The doctor said it would stop eventually, but Hope's gone and my body doesn't understand that." Scott stood slowly and moved to the window, looking out at the gardens Celestine had designed, but he'd let grow wild since her death. The moon hung full over the lake, casting silver light across overgrown rose bushes. "If I asked you to come back tomorrow," he said without turning around, Not as a cleaning lady, but as Evangeline's wet nurse. Would you consider it? The rocking chair stopped creaking. When Scott turned back, Tori was staring at him with an expression caught between hope and disbelief. You want me to nurse your daughter? I want my daughter to live, Scott said simply. And for the first time in 8 months, she looks like she might. Tori looked down at Evangeline, who slept with the boneless abandon of a truly satisfied baby. Your wife, what would she think about this? Scott's smile held more pain than joy. Celestine died giving birth to her. If she were here, Evangeline wouldn't need you. But she's not here, and our daughter is slowly dying without what only you can give her. He moved back to the window seat. I can pay you 3 times what the cleaning service does. You'd have your own room here, access to anything you need. All I ask is that you feed my daughter and help her grow strong. What about your reputation? Your social circle? What will people say when they learn you've hired a wet nurse? Scott's expression hardened. Let them talk. I've buried my wife and watched my daughter waste away. I'm done caring what people think. Tori stood carefully, settling Evangeline into her crib with movements so tender they made Scott's chest ache. The baby stirred but didn't wake, her breathing deep and even for the first time in months. I'll need to give the cleaning service notice, Tori said quietly, and I'll need to arrange my other jobs around feeding times. Other jobs? I work nights at the children's hospital, weekends at a medical clinic. I have bills, student loans from nursing school. I can't survive on just this, no matter how much you pay me. Then quit the other jobs, Scott said immediately. I'll pay you enough that you won't need them. Tori shook her head. I need to keep my nursing credentials active, and I need to maintain some independence. If this doesn't work out, if something goes wrong, I can't afford to have put all my trust in one situation. Scott understood the careful self-protection in her words. This was a woman who had learned not to depend on others, who built safety nets because life had taught her that everything could disappear without warning. Fair enough, he agreed. Can you be here tomorrow morning, early? 7 too early? 7 is perfect. Tori gathered her purse from the changing table, moving quietly so as not to wake Evangeline. At the nursery door, she paused. Mr. Kienzel, thank you for not calling the police. Scott's eyebrows rose. For what? For trusting a stranger with your child when you could have seen it as assault or kidnapping or any number of terrible things. You saved my daughter's life tonight, Scott said simply. Thank you for caring enough to try. After Tori left, Scott stood over Evangeline's crib for a long time, watching his daughter sleep more peacefully than she had since birth. Her cheeks already looked less hollow, her breathing less labored. For the first time in 8 months, hope stirred in his chest. His daughter might live. More than that, she might thrive. As he finally headed to his own room, Scott found himself thinking not just about Evangeline's future, but about the woman who had appeared like an answer to prayers he hadn't known how to pray. Tori Stiles, who had lost her own child, but still had enough love left to save his. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tonight, for the first time since Celestine died, he slept without dreaming of loss. Chapter 2. The Arrangement. Trust is not given. It is earned in small moments when someone holds your most precious thing and treats it like their own. Tori Stiles stood before the imposing gates of the Kienzel estate at 6:57 in the morning, her hands trembling as she pressed the brass intercom button. The overnight rain had left everything gleaming and fresh, but her stomach churned with the acidic fear that Scott had spent the dark hours reconsidering their arrangement. Men like him, wealthy, powerful, accustomed to control, often made decisions in emotional moments they regretted in daylight. She had learned this truth the hard way when Marcus, her ex-husband, had promised to love her through their daughter's illness, only to disappear 3 days after Hope's funeral. The iron gates swung open silently, and Tori walked up the curved driveway, her sensible nursing shoes crunching on wet gravel. She wore her best professional clothes, navy slacks, white blouse, hair pulled back in a neat bun, hoping to project competence rather than desperation. The front door opened before she could knock, revealing Scott Kenzel in a way she hadn't seen him the night before. Gone was the expensive suit and exhausted corporate warrior. Instead, he wore dark jeans and a soft gray sweater that made his green eyes more pronounced. His brown hair, mussed from sleep, caught the morning light, and Tori realized with uncomfortable clarity that he was devastatingly handsome. "You came," he said, and the relief in his voice was so genuine that some of her tension eased. "I said I would. People say many things they don't mean." Scott stepped aside to let her enter. "Especially when they've had time to think about the complications." Tori paused in the marble foyer, studying his face. "Have you had time to think about the complications, Mr. Kienzel?" "All night. And please call me Scott. We're about to share something too intimate for formalities." The words sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "Then yes, I've thought about the complications too. I'm still here." Scott's smile transformed his entire face, erasing years of grief and revealing glimpses of the man he must have been before tragedy carved hollows under his eyes. "Evangeline woke up an hour ago. She's been fussing since then, but not screaming. It's different than before." "She's hungry," Tori said with certainty, "but now she has hope that the hunger will be satisfied, so she's asking instead of demanding." They climbed the stairs together, and Tori marveled at how the house looked in daylight. Celestine Kenzel had possessed exquisite taste. The walls displayed museum-quality art. Fresh flowers graced mahogany tables despite the master's obvious depression, and every surface gleamed with care. "You have staff?" Tori asked. "A housekeeper comes 3 times a week, gardeners twice a month, but they don't live here. I prefer privacy." Scott paused outside the nursery door. "Before we go in, I need to know, are you certain about this? Once we begin, Evangeline will depend on you completely. I can't have her heart broken again if you change your mind." Tori heard the protective father beneath the careful words, and her respect for him deepened. "My daughter died in my arms 4 months ago," she said quietly. "Since then, I've been carrying around enough love for a child with no one to give it to. Your daughter needs what I have to offer. This isn't charity, Scott. This is healing." The nursery filled with Evangeline's soft cries as they entered. Scott moved immediately to the crib, lifting his daughter with the careful movements of a man still afraid he might break something precious. "Good morning, little angel," he murmured, but Evangeline continued fussing, turning her head searchingly. "She remembers," Tori said softly, settling into the rocking chair. "Babies have excellent memory for scent and touch when it comes to feeding." Scott handed Evangeline to Tori, and the infant immediately quieted, nuzzling against her chest with the instinctive movement of a baby who knew where comfort could be found. "Remarkable," Scott breathed, taking his position in the window seat. "It's like she knows you." As Tori began nursing Evangeline, she noticed Scott's careful attention to every detail, how she supported the baby's head, the rhythm of her humming, the gentle way she stroked Evangeline's cheek. This was a man taking mental notes, preparing to understand every aspect of his daughter's care. "Tell me about your nursing background," Scott said once Evangeline had settled into peaceful feeding. "I graduated from the University of Wisconsin 3 years ago," Tori replied, enjoying the weight of a satisfied baby in her arms. "Specialized in pediatric care, worked at Children's Hospital until I got married. Marcus wanted me to focus on family, so I left my job when I got pregnant. Marcus is your husband, ex-husband. The word still tasted bitter. He filed for divorce while Hope was in the NICU, said he couldn't handle watching his daughter die, couldn't handle my grief afterward. Scott's jaw tightened. He abandoned you while your child was dying? Some people run toward crisis, others run away from it. I learned which kind of man I'd married a little too late. The honesty in her voice seemed to affect Scott deeply. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. What happened to Hope? Tori had told this story dozens of times to doctors, social workers, well-meaning friends. But something about Scott's gentle attention made the words flow more easily. Hypoplastic left heart syndrome. Her heart was missing an entire chamber. The doctors said with surgery, she might live to be 5 or 6, but she'd never be truly healthy. Tori's voice remained steady, though her free hand clenched. We chose to keep her comfortable instead of putting her through procedures that would only buy time, not quality of life. That must have been an impossible decision. It was the only decision. I'm a nurse. I've seen what aggressive intervention can do to children when the outcome is predetermined. I wanted Hope to know love, not pain. Scott was quiet for several minutes, watching Evangeline nurse with obvious contentment. How did you know to offer this to her? Professional instinct, maternal instinct, desperation, probably all three. Tori smiled down at Evangeline, who had begun making the soft sounds of a satisfied baby. But also because I recognized her cry. It was exactly how Hope cried when she was hungry, but too weak to nurse. That particular pitch of frustration mixed with exhaustion. And you still produce enough milk? Tori felt heat rise in her cheeks. The intimate nature of their arrangement had seemed natural in the emotion of the previous night, but in daylight she was acutely aware of the unusual situation. My body has been producing milk for 8 months. The doctors said it would decrease gradually, but stress and grief can actually increase production. I've been, she gestured helplessly, expressing and discarding it for months. The waste of it, milk meant for Hope being thrown away while Evangeline starved, struck them both with the strange synchronicity of their meeting. It's like fate, Scott said quietly. I don't believe in fate anymore, Tori replied, but I believe in being useful, in turning loss into something that helps someone else. Evangeline had finished nursing and fallen asleep against Tori's chest, her tiny fist curled around a fold of Tori's blouse. The sight of his daughter so peaceful, so obviously thriving, made Scott's eyes fill with tears. She's gained weight already, he marveled. Look at her cheeks. Breast milk is more calorie-dense than formula and easier to digest. She'll probably want to feed every 2 to 3 hours initially, then settle into a more regular schedule as her stomach adapts. What does that mean for your other jobs? Tori had been dreading this conversation. I work 12-hour shifts at the hospital 3 nights a week, 8-hour shifts at the clinic on weekends. If Evangeline needs to feed every few hours, then you'll need to be here every day, Scott finished, which means you can't maintain your other positions. I can't afford to quit everything, Tori said carefully. I have student loans, rent, car payments. The nursing jobs provide benefits I can't get elsewhere. Scott stood and moved to the window, looking out at the gardens. What if I offered you a full-time position here, nurse to Evangeline, with a salary equivalent to what you're making now, plus benefits? That's very generous, but what happens when Evangeline is weaned, when she doesn't need me anymore? The question hung between them, loaded with the temporary nature of their arrangement. Scott turned back to her, his expression serious. How long do babies typically breastfeed? Ideally, 6 months to 2 years, depending on the child and mother. But in our situation, Tori shifted Evangeline to her shoulder for burping. I don't know how long my milk will last without the hormonal support of pregnancy and childbirth. It could be weeks. It could be months. Then we'll take it as it comes. For now, Evangeline needs you. That's enough. Tori studied his face, looking for signs of the male impatience she'd learned to expect from Marcus. But Scott's attention remained fixed on his daughter, his expression soft with wonder at her peaceful sleep. There are other considerations, Tori said carefully. Social ones, such as a wealthy white man employing a black woman as a wet nurse has historical implications that might make people uncomfortable. Scott's expression hardened. Are you uncomfortable with the arrangement? Number, but others might be. Your friends, your business associates, your family. I don't have much family left, and my friends will understand that my daughter's health comes before their comfort. Scott's voice carried steel. As for business associates, they don't get a vote in my personal decisions. Tori appreciated his conviction, but she'd lived in the world long enough to know that good intentions couldn't shield them from judgment. What about dating? Eventually, you might want to remarry. Having your child's wet nurse living in your home might complicate that. Something flickered across Scott's face. Surprise that she'd considered his romantic future, perhaps, or discomfort with the subject. I'm not thinking about dating right now. I'm thinking about keeping my daughter alive. The finality in his voice told Tori that this particular door was closed, at least for now. She filed the information away and focused on practical matters. If I agree to this arrangement, I'll need 1 day off per week to maintain my nursing credentials. Volunteer work at the free clinic, continuing education classes. Of course, what else? Complete autonomy over Evangeline's feeding schedule and nutritional decisions. I won't have someone second-guessing medical choices based on convenience. Agreed. And privacy. No one observes feeding sessions without invitation. This is intimate work, and I won't perform it under scrutiny. Scott's cheeks colored slightly. I hadn't thought, of course, whatever you need to feel comfortable. Evangeline stirred against Tori's shoulder, making soft sounds of contentment that filled the nursery with warmth. Looking down at the baby's peaceful face, Tori felt the last of her resistance crumble. When do I start? You already have, Scott said softly. Welcome home, Tori. The word home hit her unexpectedly hard. She hadn't had a real home since Marcus left, just a series of temporary arrangements and survival strategies. The idea that this beautiful house, this peaceful nursery, this man and his daughter might become her refuge seemed too good to be true. But Evangeline's warm weight against her chest felt like an anchor to something real, something necessary. Whatever came next, whatever complications arose, she was exactly where she needed to be. For the first time in 4 months, Tori Stiles allowed herself to hope. Chapter 3. Crossing Thresholds. The heart recognizes music before the mind remembers melody, and sometimes a half-finished song can complete a soul that thought it would forever remain broken. 3 days into their arrangement, Tori discovered that Scott Kienzle was a man of invisible boundaries. He never entered the nursery during feeding times without knocking. He never asked personal questions while she was nursing Evangeline. He never lingered in doorways or made her feel observed like a curiosity. Instead, he moved through his own house like a ghost, there when needed, absent when privacy was required. But Tori was beginning to notice the things he thought he kept hidden. She noticed how he stood outside the nursery door during evening feedings, not watching but listening to her humming. She noticed the way his shoulders relaxed when Evangeline laughed, a sound the baby had started making as her strength returned. She noticed how he prepared bottles of water for her without being asked, how fresh flowers appeared in the nursery each morning. Most of all, she noticed the music room. It sat at the end of the hall like a shrine to abandoned dreams, its door always closed, dust motes dancing in the sliver of light that escaped beneath the frame. Tori had glimpsed it on her second day when a door swung open in the breeze, a grand piano draped in white cloth, violin cases stacked against mahogany walls, sheet music scattered across surfaces like abandoned prayers. Now, carrying a sleeping Evangeline after her afternoon feeding, Tori found herself standing before that closed door, drawn by impulses she couldn't name. The brass handle turned soundlessly under her touch. The room took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the lake, filling the space with golden light that set dust particles spinning like tiny dancers. The covered piano dominated the center, but Tori's attention was caught by the music stand beside it, where sheets of handwritten composition lay scattered. Moving closer, careful not to wake Evangeline, Tori could make out the careful notation of someone who understood music intimately. The piece was written in B-flat major, a lullaby by its gentle tempo marking, but it remained incomplete, the melody line stopping abruptly in the middle of the second page. "You shouldn't be in here." Scott's voice from the doorway made Tori jump, but his tone held no anger, only a bone-deep weariness that made her heart ache. "I'm sorry," she said, turning to face him. "The door was unlocked, and I was curious." Scott entered slowly, his eyes avoiding the piano as if it might burn him. "Celestine's room. She was a music teacher before we married, gave lessons to children from the neighborhood. This was her sanctuary." "The lullaby," Tori said softly, gesturing toward the music stand. "It's beautiful. Did she write it?" "We wrote it together." "For Evangeline?" Scott's voice roughened. "She hummed melodies while I worked out the harmonies. We never finished it." Tori looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms, imagining the parents who had dreamed of singing their daughter to sleep with music they created together. The tragedy of the incomplete lullaby, like so many dreams cut short by death, made her throat tight. "Would you mind if I—" She gestured toward the music, unsure how to ask without overstepping. "If you what?" "If I looked at it. I studied music before nursing school. I might be able to—" She trailed off, uncertain. Scott stared at her for a long moment, and Tori saw the war in his expression, the desire to honor his wife's memory, fighting against the fear of disturbing something sacred. "You can read music?" "I taught piano lessons through college, classical training, some composition theory." Tori shifted Evangeline carefully. "I'd never presume to change anything Celestine wrote, but sometimes a fresh perspective can help identify what's missing." Without speaking, Scott moved to the piano and pulled away the white covering, revealing gleaming ebony keys that reflected the afternoon light. He sat on the bench and placed his hands on the keyboard, his fingers finding the melody line without referring to the sheet music. The lullaby that emerged was achingly beautiful, simple enough for a child to remember, complex enough to satisfy adult ears. But it ended abruptly, mid-phrase, leaving musical tension that begged for resolution. "She hummed the next part," Scott said quietly, "but I could never capture it properly in notation. Every time I tried, it felt wrong, like I was putting words in her mouth." Tori moved closer, studying the unfinished measures. The melody wanted to resolve downward. She could feel it in the natural progression of the harmony. But there was something else, a counter-melody that would weave through the main theme like a second voice in conversation. "May I?" she asked, nodding toward the piano. Scott slid over to make room on the bench, and Tori settled beside him, Evangeline still sleeping peacefully in her arms. The proximity made her acutely aware of his warmth, the faint scent of his cologne, the way his hands moved with surprising grace across the keys. Using only her right hand, Tori picked out a melodic line that seemed to answer the unfinished phrase, a gentle response that echoed the original melody while creating something new. Scott's fingers joined hers, adding harmony beneath her treble notes, and suddenly the lullaby was complete. Not just finished, but whole, as if the missing piece had always existed and they had simply uncovered it. They played through the entire song twice, their hands moving in unconscious synchrony, before Scott's fingers stilled on the keys. "That's it," he whispered. "That's what Celestine was humming. How did you know?" Tori studied the keys beneath her fingers, afraid to meet his eyes. "Music is conversation. She started a thought, and you carried it forward. I just listened to what came next. You have perfect pitch, close to it, and I have experience finishing other people's songs." Tori's smile held old pain. "My mother was a jazz singer before she married my father. She used to start melodies and let me find the endings. Said it taught me to listen with my heart instead of my head." "Is she still alive? Your mother?" "Alive, but not speaking to me. She didn't approve of my marriage to Marcus, said I was throwing away my education for a man who didn't deserve me." Tori's laugh held no humor. "Turns out she was right, but being right isn't the same as being forgiven for saying it." Scott was quiet for several minutes, his fingers tracing silent patterns on the keys. "Celestine would have liked you," he said finally. "She believed music was meant to be shared, not hoarded. She would have been glad to know her lullaby found its voice." The words hit Tori unexpectedly hard. She had prepared herself for jealousy toward Scott's deceased wife, for the awkwardness of living in another woman's space. But she hadn't expected this. The strange sense that Celestine's spirit was generous enough to welcome her presence. "Would you play it for Evangeline sometime?" Scott asked. "The complete version? Only if you play it with me. It takes both parts to make it whole." Something shifted in Scott's expression, surprise giving way to something warmer, more complex. "I haven't played with anyone since Celestine died. I wasn't sure I remembered how." "Music is like riding a bicycle," Tori said softly. "Your fingers remember, even when your heart forgets." They sat in comfortable silence, Evangeline stirring slightly in Tori's arms. The baby's eyes opened, unfocused but content, and she made the soft, cooing sounds that had become her way of greeting the world. "She's gained 8 ounces in 3 days," Scott said, stroking his daughter's cheek with infinite gentleness. "Dr. Morrison couldn't believe the change when we saw him yesterday." "Happy babies grow faster than stressed babies. She finally feels safe." "Thanks to you." Tori shifted uncomfortably under his gratitude. "I'm not performing miracles, Scott. I'm just feeding her." "You're saving her life, and mine." The quiet intensity in his voice made Tori's chest tight. "I was drowning before you came. I didn't know how to help her, didn't know how to be the father she needed. Watching her thrive now, it's given me hope that I might actually be able to do this. You were always capable of being her father. You just needed help with the logistics." "Is that what we call it? Logistics?" Scott's smile was soft, almost shy. "It feels like more than that." The words hung between them, loaded with meanings neither was ready to explore. Tori felt the dangerous warmth of connection, the temptation to lean into this unexpected intimacy, but she forced herself to remember the temporary nature of their arrangement. "I should put her down for her nap," she said, standing carefully. "She'll be hungry again in a couple of hours." Scott nodded and began covering the piano again, but his movements seemed reluctant, as if he were putting away something precious. "Scott?" Tori paused in the doorway. "Thank you for letting me see this room, for trusting me with Celestine's music. Thank you for finishing what we started." As Tori carried Evangeline toward the nursery, she found herself humming the completed lullaby, marveling at how perfectly the melody resolved, how the harmony supported both voices without overwhelming either. Behind her, she heard Scott playing the song again, slowly this time, as if memorizing the new ending. The sound followed her down the hallway, weaving itself into her consciousness like a promise. In the nursery, as she settled Evangeline into her crib, Tori realized something had fundamentally shifted in the past hour. She was no longer just a temporary caregiver passing through Scott Kenzel's life. She had become part of his daughter's story, woven into the fabric of this family in ways that went beyond simple biology. The thought should have terrified her. She had learned the hard way not to count on permanence, not to build dreams on other people's foundations. But as Evangeline's breathing deepened into sleep and the sound of piano music drifted through the house like a benediction, Tori allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to belong somewhere again. To have a home that was more than just survival. To be part of a family that chose her not out of desperation, but out of recognition that she fit into spaces they hadn't known were empty. Chapter 4. The Garden of Memory. Sometimes healing happens not by forgetting the past, but by planting new growth among the roots of what was lost, letting memory and hope intertwine until they become something beautiful enough for both the dead and the living. The greenhouse stood like a crystal cathedral at the edge of Scott's property, its glass walls catching the morning sun and throwing rainbows across the overgrown gardens that surrounded it. Tori discovered it by accident on her 5th day at the estate, while exploring the grounds during Evangeline's longest nap of the day. The baby carrier strapped to her chest held a contentedly sleeping Evangeline, whose weight had increased so dramatically that Dr. Morrison had declared her transformation nothing short of miraculous. But it was the greenhouse itself that took Tori's breath away. A magnificent structure that had once been someone's passion project, now standing abandoned like a forgotten dream. Celestine's conservatory, Scott's voice came from behind her, and Tori turned to find him approaching with 2 steaming cups of coffee. She designed it herself, had it built the year we married. She dreamed of growing orchids and heirloom roses, creating a garden that would bloom year-round. Tori accepted the offered coffee gratefully, studying the greenhouse's elegant bones beneath the neglect. "It's beautiful. Why don't you use it anymore?" Scott's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm not good with growing things. Everything she planted died within months of her death. Now it just serves as a monument to my inadequacy." "Or," Tori said gently, "it's waiting for someone who understands what it needs." She pushed open the glass door, surprised when it moved easily on well-oiled hinges. Inside, the space took her breath away. Raised beds ran along the walls, empty now but clearly designed by someone who understood both beauty and function. A sophisticated irrigation system waited to be activated, and the glass ceiling could be opened to provide natural ventilation. "This is extraordinary," Tori breathed, turning in a slow circle to take in every detail. The design, the infrastructure. Celestine must have been incredibly knowledgeable about horticulture. She taught environmental science before she focused on music, said growing things was just another form of composition, creating harmony between soil, water, light, and time. Evangeline stirred in her carrier, making the soft sounds that meant she was beginning to wake. Tori found herself humming the completed lullaby automatically, and the baby settled back into sleep. "You've been singing that song to her," Scott observed. "It soothes her. I think she recognizes the melody somehow, like it was meant for her." Scott moved to one of the empty raised beds, running his fingers through soil that had once been carefully tended. "Celestine used to sing while she worked out here, said plants grew better with music." Tori could picture it, a woman with Scott's gentleness and their daughter's expressive eyes, nurturing seedlings while filling the air with melody. The image should have made her feel like an intruder, but instead she felt a strange sense of continuity, as if she were being invited to carry forward something precious. What did she grow? Everything. Herbs for cooking, vegetables for the table, flowers for the house. But her specialty was roses, antique varieties with names like poetry. Mr. Lincoln, Double Delight, Chrysler Imperial. Scott's voice softened with memory. She said roses were proof that beauty could survive anything if it had strong enough roots. Tori walked to the far end of the greenhouse, where a potting bench held tools arranged with care: pruning shears, hand spades, watering cans that had been cleaned and stored with the precision of someone who respected their equipment. Everything waited as if Celestine might return at any moment to resume her work. "Have you considered hiring a gardener to restore this?" Scott's laugh held no humor. 3 different landscaping companies have tried. None of them could make anything grow. The soil tests came back perfect. The irrigation system works flawlessly, but every plant dies within weeks. It's like the earth itself is mourning. Tori knelt beside one of the raised beds, letting handfuls of soil sift through her fingers. It felt rich and loamy, full of potential despite its apparent rebellion against new growth. "Plants respond to intention," she said quietly. "They can sense the difference between duty and love, between someone who's just going through motions and someone who truly wants them to thrive." "You sound like you know something about gardening." "My grandmother raised me until I was 12. She had the most incredible garden you've ever seen. Tomatoes that grew like trees, roses that bloomed from spring until the first snow, herbs that could cure anything." Tori's smile was soft with memory. She said plants were just children made of green instead of flesh. They needed the same things: patience, attention, and the absolute belief that they were worth caring for. Evangeline chose that moment to wake fully, her soft cries echoing in the glass space. Tori unstrapped the carrier and lifted the baby out, settling onto a wooden bench that ran along one wall. "Is it all right if I feed her here?" she asked. "The light is beautiful, and it's private enough." Scott's answer came in the form of actions rather than words. He moved to the far end of the greenhouse, giving them space while remaining close enough to watch over them. The arrangement had become their routine, this careful dance of intimacy and respect. As Evangeline began nursing, Tori found herself imagining what the space could become. The raised beds filled with vegetables and herbs, trellises supporting climbing roses, hanging baskets overflowing with flowers. She could picture herself working here in the early mornings before Evangeline woke, creating beauty while the baby slept in her carrier. "I could try," she said suddenly. Scott looked up from where he'd been examining the irrigation controls. "Try what?" "To bring the greenhouse back to life, to grow the things Celestine wanted to grow." The offer hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to build. Scott's expression cycled through surprise, hope, and something that looked dangerously like relief. "You would do that?" "I'd like to try, not to replace what she built, but to honor it, to prove that beautiful things can grow again even after—" Tori gestured helplessly. "After everything seems lost." Scott moved closer, his eyes bright with an emotion Tori couldn't name. She would have wanted that. Celestine believed gardens were meant to evolve, to reflect the people who tended them while respecting what came before. "Then you'll let me?" "On one condition." Scott's smile was tentative but genuine. "Let me help. I may not have Celestine's gift for growing things, but I can learn. I want to learn." The image of them working side by side, hands deep in soil while Evangeline watched from her carrier, filled Tori with unexpected warmth. It would mean spending more time together outside the carefully maintained boundaries of their arrangement, sharing something that went beyond the simple exchange of care for compensation. "We could start small," she said carefully. "Herbs, maybe some vegetables, things that are forgiving for beginners." "And roses?" Tori heard the hope in his voice, the desire to see his wife's passion bloom again, even in different hands. "Eventually. Roses require patience and experience, but they're not impossible." Evangeline finished nursing and settled into Tori's arms with the boneless contentment of a thoroughly satisfied baby. The afternoon light streaming through the glass ceiling caught the fine copper threads in her hair, a gift from her mother that would grow more pronounced as she aged. "When could we start?" Scott asked. "Tomorrow, if you want. I know a nursery that specializes in organic starts, and Evangeline is sleeping longer between feedings now. We could work in the mornings while she naps." Scott moved to sit beside them on the bench, close enough that Tori could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He reached out to stroke Evangeline's cheek with infinite gentleness, and his fingers accidentally brushed Tori's hand. The contact was electric, not the simple chemistry of attraction, but something deeper and more complex. Recognition, perhaps, or the awareness that they were building something together that went beyond their original arrangement. Both of them froze, neither pulling away nor acknowledging what had passed between them. Evangeline made a soft sound of contentment, oblivious to the tension suddenly crackling in the air. "I should research what grows best in this climate," Tori said finally, her voice slightly breathless. "I have Celestine's gardening journals," Scott replied, his hand still resting near hers. She documented everything: soil conditions, planting schedules, what worked and what didn't. "They're yours if you want them." The generosity of the offer, trusting her with his wife's most personal records, made Tori's chest tight. "Are you sure? They must be precious to you." "They're precious, but they're also meant to be used. Celestine would hate the idea of her knowledge sitting in a drawer while her garden grew wild." Tori nodded, not trusting her voice. The greenhouse around them felt different now, not a mausoleum to the past, but a space pregnant with possibility. She could almost see it as it would become, alive with green growth, filled with the sounds of their quiet conversation and Evangeline's developing laughter. "There's something else," Scott said quietly. "Something I should probably warn you about." "What?" "My business partner, Nathaniel Blackwood, is coming for dinner Thursday night. He's been curious about the changes in my situation. I may have mentioned that I hired a full-time nanny for Evangeline." Tori understood immediately. "You didn't mention that the nanny is also Evangeline's wet nurse." "I wasn't sure how to explain it without making it sound." Scott searched for words. "Inappropriate." "It is inappropriate by most social standards," Tori said with a slight smile. "That doesn't make it wrong. Nathaniel can be judgmental, old-fashioned in his thinking about class and social boundaries." "Are you warning me to stay out of sight during his visit?" Scott's expression hardened. "I'm warning you that he might say things that are meant to make you uncomfortable. If he does, I want you to know that his opinions don't reflect mine, and they certainly don't affect your position here." The protectiveness in his voice sent warmth flooding through Tori's chest. She had grown used to fighting her own battles, defending her choices without backup. The idea that Scott would stand between her and judgment felt like a gift she hadn't known she needed. "I can handle difficult men," she said softly. "I've had practice." "You shouldn't have to handle them. Not in your own home." The words slipped out before Scott could stop them, and both of them stilled at the implication. Home. As if this weren't just a temporary arrangement, as if Tori belonged here in some permanent way. "I mean," Scott began, but Tori interrupted gently. "I know what you meant. And thank you for making this feel like home, even if it's only temporary." They sat in comfortable silence as the afternoon light shifted through the glass ceiling, painting everything in golden warmth. Evangeline slept peacefully between them, her breathing deep and even, while outside the wind stirred the overgrown roses that waited for someone to love them back to life. Tomorrow they would begin the work of restoration, not just of the garden, but of their own capacity to nurture growth after loss. Tonight, they would sit in this space of possibility and imagine what beautiful things might bloom when grief and hope learn to grow together. For the first time since Hope's death, Tori felt the stirring of something that went beyond mere survival. She felt the dangerous, wonderful beginnings of joy. Chapter 5. Storm and shelter. In the space between lightning and thunder, hearts reveal truths that daylight makes them too cautious to speak, and sometimes it takes darkness to show us the light we've been afraid to see. The storm announced itself with a low rumble of thunder that made Evangeline stir restlessly in Tori's arms. They had been working in the greenhouse for 3 days now, and already the space showed signs of transformation. Seedling trays lined the potting bench, herb starts sent up fragrant shoots toward the glass ceiling, and the empty raised beds waited for the tomato and pepper plants they'd selected from Celestine's journals. "That doesn't sound good," Scott said, looking up from where he'd been carefully transplanting basil seedlings. His hands, Tori had discovered, were naturally gentle with delicate things, a revelation that surprised him more than it did her. The sky outside had darkened to an ominous purple-green, and the wind whipped the overgrown roses against the greenhouse walls with increasing urgency. "Evangeline doesn't like storms," Tori observed, as the baby fussed and turned her face into Tori's neck. "Something about the pressure changes makes her uncomfortable." Scott stood and moved to the windows, studying the approaching weather with the expression of someone who had learned to read nature's moods. "This is going to be a bad one. We should head back to the house." As if summoned by his words, the first fat raindrops splattered against the glass ceiling, followed immediately by a crack of lightning that made all three of them jump. Evangeline's fussing escalated to genuine crying, the high-pitched wail of an infant whose nervous system was overwhelmed. "Shh, sweet girl," Tori murmured, swaying gently as she tried to soothe the baby. "It's just noise. You're safe." But Evangeline was beyond comfort, her cries growing more frantic as thunder rolled overhead. Scott reached for his phone to call the house, then swore softly. "No signal. The storm must be interfering with the towers." Another lightning strike, this one close enough to make the greenhouse lights flicker, sent Evangeline into full panic. Her cries became breathless shrieks that tore at Tori's heart. She had heard these sounds before, in the NICU with Hope, when monitors beeped alarms and tiny bodies fought against overwhelming stimulation. "We need to get her inside," Tori said urgently. But even as she spoke, the rain intensified to a torrential downpour that would soak them within seconds of leaving the greenhouse. Scott moved quickly to the storage area at the back of the building, returning with an armload of supplies. "Garden blankets, emergency lantern, bottled water," he said, setting everything on the potting bench. "We're safer staying here until the worst passes. The greenhouse is grounded and well built." As if testing his words, the power went out, plunging them into the gray twilight of storm-filtered daylight. The emergency lantern cast dancing shadows on the glass walls, creating a cave-like intimacy that made the space feel both protective and precarious. Evangeline's cries had reached a pitch that spoke of genuine distress, and Tori felt her own panic rising in response. She tried nursing, but the baby was too agitated to latch properly. She tried rocking, singing, gentle bouncing. Nothing worked. "Here," Scott said quietly, spreading garden blankets on the floor in the corner farthest from the windows. "Let's create a nest. Sometimes small spaces help babies feel secure." Tori sank gratefully onto the makeshift bedding, cradling Evangeline against her chest. The baby's face was red with exertion, her tiny fists clenched as she fought against comfort. "I don't know what else to do," Tori admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "She's terrified and I can't fix it." Scott settled beside them, close enough that his warmth became part of their shelter. "You're not supposed to fix everything. Sometimes the best thing we can do is just be present while someone we love works through their fear." The wisdom in his words caught Tori off guard. This was a man who had learned about helplessness the hard way, who understood that love sometimes meant witnessing pain you couldn't prevent. "Tell me about the worst storm you remember," Scott said suddenly. "What?" "A story. Sometimes distraction helps. His voice was calm, steady beneath the chaos of wind and rain. Tell me about a storm from your childhood. Tori shifted Evangeline to her shoulder, rubbing the baby's back in slow circles. I was 7, she began, surprised to find her voice steadying as she spoke. Living with my grandmother in rural Alabama, a tornado touched down about 5 miles from our house, and we spent the night in the root cellar listening to the world tear itself apart above us. Evangeline's cries began to soften, whether from exhaustion or the rhythm of Tori's voice. She couldn't tell. Were you scared? Terrified. But my grandmother sat with me in the dark and told me stories about her own childhood, about how her mother had survived the Great Depression by believing that every storm eventually ran out of rain. Tori's smile was soft with memory. She said fear was just energy looking for somewhere to go, and if we gave it something to do, like listening to stories or singing songs, it would transform into something useful. Smart woman. The smartest person I ever knew. She died when I was in nursing school, but I still hear her voice sometimes when I'm afraid. Scott was quiet for several minutes, his presence solid and comforting beside her. Evangeline had finally begun to settle, her cries becoming intermittent hiccups as exhaustion overtook panic. My mother used to tell me that thunder was just angels rearranging furniture in heaven, Scott said eventually. I believed her until I was 10 and decided angels probably had better things to do than interior decorating. Tori laughed despite herself, a sound that seemed to calm Evangeline further. What did you believe after that? That storms were nature's way of cleaning house, washing away the old to make room for new growth. He gestured toward the rain streaming down the glass walls. Celestine taught me that. She said every garden needed storms to thrive. Do you believe that now? Scott considered the question seriously, his eyes reflecting the lantern's glow. I'm starting to. Before you came, I thought the storm that took Celestine had destroyed everything worth saving. But watching you bring life back to her garden, seeing Evangeline grow strong. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Maybe some storms clear the way for things we never knew we needed. The intimacy of the moment settled around them like a cocoon, made more intense by their isolation and the vulnerability of caring for a frightened child together. Evangeline had finally succumbed to sleep, her body relaxed against Tori's chest, her breathing deep and even. She's beautiful when she sleeps, Tori whispered, stroking the baby's copper hair. So peaceful, like she trusts completely that she'll be safe. She trusts you, Scott corrected softly. She knows you'll protect her. We'll protect her, Tori said automatically, then felt heat rise in her cheeks as she realized what she'd implied, that they were a team, a partnership in more than just the practical care of his daughter. Scott's eyes met hers in the lantern light, and Tori saw her own awareness reflected there, the knowledge that something fundamental had shifted between them in the past hour. They had weathered crisis together, creating safety for Evangeline through their combined strength, and the intimacy of that shared purpose had broken down barriers neither had acknowledged building. Tori, Scott said quietly, his voice carrying undertones that made her pulse quicken. Don't, she whispered, though she couldn't look away from his face. Don't say whatever you're thinking. Why not? Because once certain words are spoken, they can't be taken back, and this situation is already complicated enough. Scott shifted slightly closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with a gentleness that made her breath catch. What if I don't want to take them back? Then you're not thinking clearly. The storm, the isolation, the adrenaline. It's making everything seem more intense than it really is. Is it? His thumb traced across her cheekbone, and Tori felt her resolve wavering. Or is it just giving us permission to acknowledge what's been building for days? Evangeline stirred slightly in Tori's arms, reminding them both of the sleeping child between them, the reason they had come together in the first place. The moment broke like a soap bubble, leaving them staring at each other with expressions caught between longing and restraint. "We can't," Tori said finally, her voice barely audible above the rain. "Not like this. Not when emotions are running so high." Scott's hand dropped away from her face, but he didn't move back. "You're right. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "You shouldn't have what? Felt something? Been honest about it?" Tori's smile was soft, taking any sting out of her words. "There's nothing to apologize for, but there's also nothing we can act on. Not yet." "Not yet," Scott agreed quietly. "But someday?" The question hung between them like a promise neither was ready to make but couldn't bear to dismiss. Tori looked down at Evangeline's sleeping face, at this child who had brought them together in the most unlikely circumstances, and felt her heart make a decision her mind wasn't ready to accept. "Someday is a long time away," she said carefully. "A lot can change between now and then." "Some things don't change," Scott replied. "Some things just grow stronger." Outside, the storm began to lose its fury, the thunder moving into the distance and the rain settling into a steady rhythm against the glass. But inside their makeshift shelter, surrounded by the tools of renewal and the promise of new growth, Tori felt the beginning of something that might, eventually, bloom into the kind of love worth waiting for. For now, it was enough to sit in the lantern light with this man and his daughter, listening to the rain wash the world clean, and knowing that when morning came, they would emerge changed by more than just the storm. Chapter 6. Society's Poison. Nothing reveals the true nature of people, quite like watching how they react when love refuses to follow the rules they've written for it, when hearts choose connection over convention and make bigotry show its ugly face. Thursday evening arrived with crystalline clarity that only follows severe weather, as if the storm had scrubbed the air clean and left the world sharper around the edges. Tori stood in the nursery, settling Evangeline after her evening feeding, when she heard the crunch of expensive tires on gravel that announced Nathaniel Blackwood's arrival. She had spent the day trying not to think about Scott's warning regarding his business partner, but anxiety had been building in her chest like barometric pressure before lightning strikes. Men like Nathaniel, wealthy, influential, accustomed to having their prejudices validated, could be dangerous in ways that went beyond mere rudeness. "He's here," Scott said quietly from the nursery doorway, his voice carrying tension that hadn't been there since the storm. He wore a charcoal suit that emphasized his height, every inch the successful businessman prepared to do battle. But Tori could see the worry in his eyes, the protective stance of a man preparing to defend something precious. "I'll stay up here until he leaves," Tori said, adjusting Evangeline's blanket. "No point in creating complications." "You're not the complication," Scott said firmly. "You're part of this family. You belong in this house as much as anyone." The words sent warmth through Tori's chest, but she shook her head. "Belonging and being welcomed by your guests are two different things. I know when to make myself scarce." Scott moved closer, his expression troubled. "I don't want you to feel like you have to hide." "I don't feel like I have to hide. I choose to avoid unnecessary conflict." Tori smiled to soften her words. "There's a difference between cowardice and strategic discretion." Their eyes met and held, and Tori felt the echo of their moment in the greenhouse, the awareness that simmered just beneath the surface of every interaction now. The doorbell's chime broke the spell, and Scott stepped back with visible reluctance. "Dinner will be over by 8:30, he said. "Will you come down afterward?" "I'd like you to meet him properly, on your terms." After Scott left, Tori tried to lose herself in the evening routine, bathing Evangeline, reading to her, singing the lullaby that had become their nightly ritual. But her attention kept drifting to the sounds from the dining room, masculine laughter, the clink of crystal, and underneath it all, Nathaniel's voice carrying authority that expected deference. At 7:15, Evangeline finally settled into sleep, and Tori found herself restless. She wandered to the window overlooking the driveway, where Nathaniel's black Mercedes sat like a sleek predator beside Scott's more modest BMW. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her freeze. Not Scott's familiar tread, but something heavier, more purposeful. She moved quickly away from the window, but it was too late. "So you're the famous nanny." Nathaniel Blackwood stood in the nursery doorway, a brandy snifter in one hand and an expression of calculated interest on his aristocratic face. He was perhaps 50, with silver at his temples, and the kind of bearing that came from generations of inherited privilege. "Mr. Blackwood," Tori said carefully, positioning herself between him and Evangeline's crib, "I wasn't expecting to meet you this evening. I wanted to see for myself what all the fuss was about." Nathaniel stepped into the room without invitation. "Scott's been singing your praises for weeks. Miraculous transformation, he says. She's a healthy baby who needed the right nutrition. Nothing miraculous about it." "Indeed." Nathaniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Though I understand your particular methods are somewhat unconventional." The pause before methods was loaded with implication, and Tori felt her spine stiffen. "I'm a registered nurse with specialized training in pediatric care. There's nothing unconventional about providing proper nutrition to an infant. Most people would consider formula perfectly proper. Most people would find the alternative rather primitive. Most people don't have medical training. No, they don't, but they do have social awareness. They understand boundaries, appropriate relationships between employer and employee." Nathaniel's gaze fixed on her with laser intensity. "They understand the importance of maintaining certain standards." "I'm not sure what you're implying, Mr. Blackwood." "I'm stating facts. You're an unmarried black woman living in the home of a wealthy white widower. You're performing intimate services that blur professional propriety. Scott's judgment has been compromised since his wife's death." The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to wound and diminish. Tori had expected prejudice, but the casual cruelty of Nathaniel's assessment left her momentarily speechless. "Fact," she said finally, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. "Evangeline was failing to thrive on formula and is now healthy because of the care I provide. That's the only fact that matters. To you, perhaps, but Scott has a reputation to maintain, a social position that affects his business relationships. He can't afford to be seen as a man who's lost control, who's allowed grief to cloud his judgment." "And what would you consider appropriate boundaries?" "A proper nanny. English, perhaps, or Irish, someone with credentials from an established agency, someone who understands her place." Nathaniel's smile was cold as winter. "Someone who doesn't take advantage of a vulnerable man's emotional state." Take advantage? The accusation was so outrageous that Tori almost laughed. "I think you've misunderstood the nature of my arrangement with Scott." "Have I? Because from where I stand, it looks like a very clever young woman who found herself in desperate circumstances and latched on to the first wealthy man whose defenses were down." Nathaniel finished his brandy. "I've seen it before. Women who use their ability to feed someone else's child as leverage to improve their station." The accusation was so vile, so fundamentally wrong, that Tori felt sick. But underneath the nausea was a cold, clean anger that gave her strength. "You don't know anything about me," she said quietly. "You don't know my motivations, my background, or my relationship with this family. What you're describing isn't me. It's your own prejudice talking." "Then prove me wrong. Leave. Find other employment. Let Scott hire a proper nanny, and prove that this isn't about money or position." "I don't have to prove anything to you." "No, but you should consider proving it to yourself, Because right now, the only thing standing between Scott and social ruin is your discretion. How long before people start talking about the widower who's shacked up with his black wet nurse? How long before it affects his business, his daughter's future? Each word was chosen with surgical precision, designed to find and exploit every insecurity Tori had ever harbored about her place in Scott's world. Tori? Scott's voice from the doorway made both of them turn. He stood in the entrance, his face cycling through confusion, concern, and growing anger as he took in the scene. "Nathaniel, what are you doing up here?" "Getting acquainted with your nanny," Nathaniel replied smoothly. "We've been having a fascinating conversation about professional boundaries." Scott's eyes found Tori's, and she saw the exact moment he understood what had happened. His expression went stone cold. "I think it's time for you to leave, Nathaniel Scott. I'm only trying to help you see." "I see perfectly clearly. I see a man who thinks his bigotry gives him the right to insult someone who has done nothing but care for my daughter." Scott moved into the room, placing himself between Nathaniel and Tori. "I see someone who mistakes prejudice for wisdom and cruelty for concern." "Don't be naive," Nathaniel snapped. "This situation is inappropriate by any reasonable standard. You're allowing your grief to compromise your judgment, and it's going to cost you, professionally, socially, personally." "Let them talk," Scott said flatly. "My daughter is thriving, my household is stable, and the woman you're insulting has shown more grace and integrity than you've demonstrated in 20 years of friendship. If you can't accept that, then our business partnership is over." Nathaniel's face flushed with anger and disbelief. "You're choosing her over me? Over everything we've built together?" "I'm choosing what's right over what's convenient. I'm choosing love over fear." Scott's voice softened slightly, but his resolve remained absolute. "I won't tolerate anyone treating Tori with disrespect. Not in her own home." The phrase, "her own home," hung in the air like a declaration, and Tori felt tears threaten for the first time since Nathaniel's attack began. Nathaniel looked between them, reading the subtext. "I see," he said finally. "It's not just about the baby, is it? You're in love with her." Scott's silence was answer enough. "Then you're a fool," Nathaniel said with quiet venom. "And when this blows up in your face, when society makes its judgment clear, don't come crying to me for help." He brushed past Scott and disappeared down the hallway, leaving behind only the lingering scent of expensive cologne and the echo of threats. Scott stood motionless until they heard the front door slam and the Mercedes roar to life. Only then did he turn to Tori, his face etched with concern. "Are you all right? What did he say to you?" Tori found herself shaking, not from fear, but from the aftershock of having her worst insecurities voiced aloud. "Nothing I haven't thought myself," she admitted quietly. "What do you mean?" "That this situation is complicated, that people will talk, that your reputation might suffer because of your association with me." Tori moved to the window, staring out at the darkness. "Maybe he's right. Maybe I should find other employment." "Don't you dare," Scott said fiercely, crossing to her. "Don't you dare let that poisonous bigot make you question your worth or your place here." "It's not about worth, Scott. It's about reality. I'm a black woman with no family money, no social connections, no protection against the kind of judgment Nathaniel represents. Then I'll build a new business and we'll create our own future." Scott's hands came up to frame her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Tori, you're not a liability. You're the woman who saved my daughter's life and brought hope back into this house. If the world can't see that, then the world is blind. And if the world refuses to accept us, then we'll prove them wrong. One day at a time, one person at a time, until they have no choice but to acknowledge what we know, that love doesn't follow their rules, and happiness doesn't require their permission. Standing in the lamplight of Evangeline's nursery, with his hands gentle on her face and his eyes bright with protective fury, Scott looked like a man prepared to fight the world for the right to love whom he chose. And for the first time since Nathaniel's attack, Tori felt her doubt give way to something stronger, the fierce determination to prove that what they were building together was worth defending. Chapter 7. The Breaking Point. Love's greatest enemy is not hatred but fear, the terror that we are unworthy of happiness, that joy is a debt we'll eventually be forced to pay, that every moment of grace is borrowed time before the universe corrects its mistake. The aftermath of Nathaniel's visit settled over the house like invisible ash, contaminating everything with the residue of his poison. For 3 days, Scott and Tori moved around each other with careful politeness, both hyper-aware of how Nathaniel's accusations had changed the air between them. Scott worked from home, claiming business calls that kept him sequestered in his office. Tori focused on Evangeline with laser intensity, as if perfect maternal devotion could somehow shield them all from the ugliness that had invaded their sanctuary. But on Sunday morning, as Tori sat in the greenhouse nursing Evangeline while Scott transplanted tomato seedlings with unnecessary precision, the careful distance between them finally cracked. "We need to talk about what happened Thursday night," Scott said without looking up from the soil. Tori's hand stilled on Evangeline's back. "I thought we had talked about it." "No, we reacted to it. We defended against it. But we haven't actually discussed what it means for us going forward." The words hung between them like a challenge neither wanted to accept. Tori looked down at Evangeline, who nursed with the peaceful contentment of a baby who trusted completely in her safety and felt her heart break a little for the innocence that would someday be lost to the world's harsh judgments. "Nathaniel wasn't entirely wrong," she said finally. "Not about his motives or his methods, but about the complications our situation creates." Scott's hands went still in the soil. "You're having second thoughts." "I'm having realistic thoughts. About what it means for a woman like me to be involved with a man like you. About the price Evangeline might pay for our choices." "A woman like you," Scott repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "What exactly does that mean?" Tori met his eyes across the space between them, seeing the hurt and confusion there. "You know what it means. A black woman with no money, no family connections, no protection against the kind of scrutiny that comes with your social position." "That's not how I see you. It doesn't matter how you see me if the rest of the world sees me differently." Tori shifted Evangeline to her shoulder. "What matters is how that perception affects your business, your social relationships, Evangeline's future opportunities." Scott stood abruptly, soil falling from his hands as he moved closer to where she sat. "Do you hear yourself? You're letting Nathaniel's bigotry become your truth. You're accepting his assessment of your worth instead of trusting your own." "I'm being practical about the realities we face. Reality is that my daughter is healthy and happy because of you. Reality is that I haven't felt truly alive since Celestine died until you walked into our lives. Reality is that what we have together is worth fighting for, regardless of what small-minded people think." The passion in his voice made Tori's chest tight with longing and fear in equal measure. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that love could overcome the obstacles they faced, but life had taught her that wanting something and being able to keep it were very different things. "Scott," she began, but the sound of a car on the gravel drive interrupted whatever she had been about to say. Through the greenhouse windows, they could see a silver Lexus pulling up to the house, expensive but not ostentatious, the kind of car driven by someone with money but no need to flaunt it. A woman emerged from the driver's seat, tall and elegant with steel-gray hair and bearing that spoke of generations of refined breeding. "My mother," Tori said, the words falling like stones into still water. Scott's eyebrows rose. I thought you said she wasn't speaking to you. She's not, which makes her being here either very good news or very bad news. Tori stood carefully, settling Evangeline against her shoulder. Probably bad news. They made their way back to the house in tense silence, Tori's mind racing through possible reasons for Serafina Styles's unexpected appearance. Her mother was not a woman given to spontaneous gestures or sentimental reconciliations. If she had driven 3 hours from Chicago to Scott's estate, she had come with a purpose. The doorbell chimed just as they reached the foyer, and Tori felt her stomach clench with familiar anxiety. Scott reached for the door handle, but Tori stopped him with a gentle touch on his arm. Let me, she said quietly. This is going to be difficult enough without you being caught in the crossfire from the beginning. Tori opened the door to find her mother standing on the threshold, like a figure from her childhood nightmares, beautiful, composed, and radiating the kind of controlled disappointment that could reduce a grown woman to a trembling child. Hello, Victoria. The use of her full name was a warning shot. Serafina had always called her Victoria when she was angry, Tori when she was pleased, and nothing at all when she was determined to pretend her daughter didn't exist. Hello, Mother. This is unexpected. I'm sure it is. Serafina's gaze moved past Tori to take in Scott, who stood quietly in the background, and then to Evangeline, who had begun to fuss at the tension in Tori's voice. May I come in? We have things to discuss. Tori stepped aside reluctantly, watching her mother catalog every detail of the house's expensive elegance with the practiced eye of someone who had spent her life learning to navigate wealthy social circles. Mrs. Styles, Scott said, moving forward with polished courtesy. I'm Scott Kinzel. It's a pleasure to meet you. Serafina studied him with clinical assessment, taking in his appearance, his bearing, the way he positioned himself, slightly protectively, near Tori and Evangeline. Mr. Kinzel, I've heard quite a lot about you recently. The words carried implications that made Tori's blood run cold. From whom? From several sources, actually. Word travels fast in certain circles when a story is particularly interesting. Serafina's smile was sharp as broken glass. The tragic widower and his devoted wet nurse. It has all the elements of a compelling narrative. Mother, don't. Serafina's voice cut through Tori's protest like a blade. Don't pretend this is anything other than what it appears to be. Don't insult my intelligence by claiming this arrangement is purely professional. Scott stepped forward, his expression hardening. Mrs. Styles, I think there may be some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding is my daughter's belief that she can play house with a white man and his child without consequences. Serafina's attention focused on Tori with laser intensity. Do you have any idea what people are saying about you, about this situation? Evangeline, sensitive to the rising tension, began to cry. Not the gentle fussing that signaled hunger or tiredness, but the sharp wails of a baby responding to adult distress. Tori automatically began the swaying motion that usually soothed her, but her own anxiety was too high for the comfort to be effective. Here, Scott said quietly, reaching for Evangeline. Let me take her while you talk to your mother. The simple gesture, Scott accepting responsibility for his daughter, so Tori could handle her family crisis, was so naturally caring that it made Serafina's eyes narrow with fresh suspicion. How convenient, she murmured. How perfectly domestic. Mother, what exactly are you trying to say? I'm saying that I didn't sacrifice everything to give you opportunities only to watch you throw them away on a fantasy that will destroy you. Serafina moved into the living room without invitation. I'm saying that you're repeating my mistakes, and I won't stand by and watch history repeat itself. The reference to her mother's past, the failed marriage to Tori's father, the struggle as a single mother, The difficult years before she found security with her second husband hit like a physical blow. "This isn't the same situation," Tori said carefully. "Isn't it? A young black woman, alone and vulnerable, taking care of a white man's child and convincing herself it's love instead of convenience." Serafina's laugh was bitter. "I've lived this story, Victoria. I know how it ends." Scott, who had been quietly trying to calm Evangeline, looked up with sharp attention. "With respect, Mrs. Stiles, you don't know anything about my feelings for your daughter or the nature of our relationship." "Don't I? Then tell me, Mr. Kienzel, when you tire of this domestic fantasy, when the novelty wears off or social pressure becomes too great, what happens to Victoria then? What happens when you decide you need a wife who fits better into your world?" The accusation hung in the air like a curse, and Tori saw Scott's face cycle through anger, hurt, and something that looked dangerously like doubt. "It's not like that," Scott said, but his voice lacked the conviction of his earlier declarations. "Then what is it like? Because from where I stand, it looks exactly like what I went through 30 years ago. A white man who needed help with his child, and a black woman desperate enough to believe she could earn love through service." "That's enough," Tori said sharply, her protective instincts finally overriding her fear of her mother's disapproval. "You don't know Scott. You don't know our situation. And you have no right to judge what we've built together." "What you've built?" Serafina's eyebrows rose. "And what exactly have you built? A job that requires you to use your body to feed someone else's child? A living situation that depends entirely on his continued goodwill? A relationship that exists only as long as you remain useful?" Each question was designed to wound, to expose the insecurities that Tori had been fighting since the day she'd first nursed Evangeline. "You need to leave," Tori said quietly. "I need you to come with me," Serafina countered. "I need you to walk away from this before it destroys you the way it almost destroyed me." "No." "Victoria, be smart. Take the lesson I learned the hard way and save yourself the heartbreak. Men like him don't marry women like us. They use us until they find something better. Then they discard us and tell themselves they were being kind by giving us a chance." The words hit Scott like physical blows, and Tori saw him flinch with each accusation. Evangeline, perhaps sensing her father's distress, began crying harder. "I think you should go, Mrs. Stiles," Scott said, his voice carefully controlled. "Tori is a grown woman capable of making her own decisions." "Is she? Because it looks to me like she's making the same mistakes I made, ignoring the same red flags, believing the same lies about love conquering all." Serafina turned back to Tori. "Come home with me, baby. Come back to Chicago where people know your worth, where you don't have to pretend to be grateful for scraps of affection." The plea in her mother's voice, the genuine fear and love underneath the harsh words, made Tori's eyes fill with tears. Serafina had loved unwisely once, had trusted a man who ultimately chose convenience over commitment. "I'm not you, Mother," Tori said gently. "And Scott isn't father. How do you know? How can you be sure when you're living in his house, caring for his child, dependent on his generosity for everything? When he holds all the power and you hold none?" The question exposed the fundamental inequality that Tori had been trying not to acknowledge. The fact that everything in her current life depended on Scott's continued desire for her presence. "I know because I know Scott," Tori said, but even to her own ears the words sounded less certain than she wanted them to. "You know what he's shown you," Serafina corrected. "You know the version of himself he's presented while he needs you. But people change, Victoria. Circumstances change, and when they do, women like us are the first to be sacrificed." Tori looked at Scott, who stood holding his crying daughter with an expression caught between love and torment, and felt something crack inside her chest. Not her love for him, that remained absolute, but her faith in their ability to overcome the obstacles the world would place in their path. "Maybe," she said quietly. "You're right. Maybe I should go before we all get hurt." The words fell into the room like grenades, and Tori saw Scott's face go white with shock and pain. "Tori, no. Don't let her fear become your fear." "It's not fear, Scott. It's wisdom." Tori moved to take Evangeline from his arms, needing the comfort of the baby's weight against her chest. "Maybe it's better to end this before—" "Before what? Before we have a chance to see if what we feel is real? Before we find out if love really can overcome prejudice?" Scott's voice cracked with desperation. "Don't run, Tori. Please, fight for us." But Tori was already moving toward the stairs, Evangeline's cries echoing through the house like a soundtrack to heartbreak. Behind her, she could hear her mother's satisfied sigh and Scott's sharp intake of breath. "I'll pack my things," she said without turning around. "I can be gone by tonight." She didn't wait for his response, couldn't bear to see the pain she knew would be written across his face. Instead, she climbed the stairs to the nursery where this had all begun, where she had first held his daughter and felt the stirring of impossible hope. Some dreams, she told herself, as Evangeline's cries finally began to quiet, were too beautiful to survive the harsh light of reality. Some love stories were meant to end before they destroyed everyone involved. But as she began pulling clothes from drawers with shaking hands, Tori couldn't shake the feeling that she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Chapter 8. The Choice. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay when everything inside you screams to run, but sometimes the most loving thing you can do is return when pride tells you to never look back. The pediatric wing of Chicago General Hospital buzzed with the familiar chaos that had once felt like home to Tori, but now seemed foreign and overwhelming. 3 weeks had passed since she'd left Scott's estate with her mother, 3 weeks of trying to convince herself that returning to her old life was the right choice, the safe choice. But safety, she had discovered, was a cold comfort when your heart lived somewhere else entirely. "Tori, we need you in room 314, called Dr. Sarah Martinez, the head of pediatric nursing. 6-month-old with failure to thrive. Mother's beside herself, and you have the best track record with difficult feeding cases." Tori nodded and made her way down the sterile hallway, her nurse's shoes silent against the polished floors. She had thrown herself into work with desperate intensity since returning to Chicago, volunteering for extra shifts and the most challenging cases. Anything to avoid the suffocating apartment her mother had arranged, anything to escape the accusatory silence that hung between them, despite Serafina's certainty that she had saved her daughter from disaster. Room 314 held a scene that hit Tori like a physical blow. A young Hispanic woman sat in the bedside chair, holding a baby who was heartbreakingly thin, his cries weak and reedy. The mother's face was streaked with tears, her exhaustion and despair so palpable that Tori felt her chest constrict with recognition. "Mrs. Rodriguez." Tori moved into the room with practiced calm. "I'm Tori Stiles, one of the nurses. Dr. Martinez asked me to assess Miguel's feeding situation." "He won't eat," Maria Rodriguez whispered, her voice breaking. "Formula, breast milk, nothing works. He just cries, and I don't know what to do. They say he might need a feeding tube, but he's so small, so fragile." Tori looked down at baby Miguel, seeing not just his obvious malnutrition, but the particular quality of his distress. The same frustrated hunger she had recognized in Evangeline months ago. Her hands moved automatically to examine his mouth, his reflexes, the way he responded to stimulation. Has he been tested for lactose intolerance, reflux, tongue-tie? Everything came back normal. They say there's no medical reason why he can't digest formula. Maria's tears fell faster. "But I can see him wasting away, and nobody seems to understand what's wrong." Tori felt a familiar stirring, the maternal instinct that had led her to offer her own milk to a stranger's crying baby, the recognition of a problem she uniquely understood how to solve. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I know this might sound strange, but would you be open to trying an alternative feeding method? Something that might help Miguel gain weight while you work with the doctors to find a long-term solution." "Anything. I'll try anything." Looking down at Miguel's drawn face, Tori felt the past 3 weeks of doubt and self-protection crumble. This was what she was meant to do, not just nursing in the technical sense, but nurturing in the most fundamental way possible. Her body still produced milk meant for hope, milk that could save other babies while their families fought for answers. But as she began explaining the possibility of wet nursing to Maria Rodriguez, Tori's mind was filled with images of another baby, another feeding arrangement that had become so much more than either party had expected. She thought of Evangeline's bright copper hair, her contented sighs during nursing, the way she had started reaching for both Tori and Scott with equal trust and affection. She thought of Scott. For 3 weeks she had forced herself not to call, not to ask about Evangeline's health or whether Scott had found a suitable replacement. Her mother monitored her phone calls and visitors with the vigilance of a prison warden, convinced that any contact would drag Tori back into what Serafina saw as an emotionally abusive situation. But late at night, when the apartment was quiet and her mother slept peacefully in the next room, Tori found herself staring at the ceiling and wondering whether she had made the greatest mistake of her life. Not because she doubted her mother's love or feared for her practical security, but because she had begun to understand that some risks were worth taking, some love worth fighting for despite the odds. "Nurse Stiles?" Dr. Martinez's voice from the doorway brought Tori back to the present. The doctor's expression was carefully neutral, but Tori could see the curiosity in her eyes. "I was wondering if I could speak with you privately for a moment." Tori finished settling Miguel with his mother and followed Dr. Martinez into the hallway, her stomach tight with apprehension. "I had an interesting phone call this morning, Doctor," Martinez said without preamble, "from a Dr. Morrison at University Hospital in Wisconsin. He wanted to verify your credentials and ask about your availability for a consultation." "A consultation?" "Apparently he has a case, a baby who was thriving under unconventional care but has now regressed severely since that care was discontinued. The child's father is requesting specifically that you assess the situation." Tori's heart began beating so hard she was certain Dr. Martinez could hear it. "Did Dr. Morrison mention the child's name?" "Evangeline Kenzel, 8 months old, previous failure to thrive resolved through wet nursing, now experiencing rapid weight loss and developmental regression since her wet nurse left the family 3 weeks ago." The words hit Tori like a physical blow. Evangeline was sick again, losing the ground they had gained together, crying inconsolably for comfort that only Tori could provide. The image of that sweet baby wasting away because of her absence made Tori's eyes fill with tears. "The father has requested that you return temporarily to assess whether resuming the previous feeding arrangement might help stabilize the child's condition. Dr. Morrison says he's never seen such a clear case of emotional failure to thrive in an infant." Emotional failure to thrive? Babies can literally lose the will to live when they're separated from primary attachment figures. In this case, it appears the child bonded so completely with you that your absence has triggered a grief response serious enough to affect her physical health. Tori leaned against the wall, overwhelmed by the implications. Evangeline wasn't just hungry, she was heartbroken. A baby who had known love and security was now experiencing the abandonment and loss that Tori had tried so hard to protect her from. Dr. Morrison also mentioned that the child's father has been struggling since your departure. Apparently, he's barely eating, not sleeping, neglecting his business responsibilities. The grandmother has stepped in to help with childcare, but the situation is deteriorating rapidly. Scott was falling apart. The man who had defended her against Nathaniel's prejudice, who had been prepared to rebuild his entire life rather than lose her, was drowning in the same grief that had nearly destroyed him after Celestine's death. "What exactly is Dr. Morrison requesting?" "That you return to Wisconsin for a consultation, 3 days just to assess Evangeline's condition and provide recommendations for her ongoing care. Professional consultation only, no long-term commitment required." The careful qualifier told Tori that Dr. Martinez understood there was more to this situation than simple medical consultation, but was offering her an opportunity to return with professional cover if she wanted it. When would this consultation take place? "Immediately, if you're willing. Dr. Morrison says the child's condition is serious enough to warrant emergency intervention." Tori closed her eyes, seeing Evangeline's face in her mind. The bright copper hair, the trusting blue eyes, the way she had relaxed completely in Tori's arms, as if she had finally found her safe harbor. The idea that this precious child was suffering because of choices Tori had made in fear was unbearable. "I'll need to arrange coverage for my shifts here." "Already done. I took the liberty of assuming you'd want to help." Dr. Martinez's smile was knowing, and Tori realized that her supervisor had read between the lines of the professional request and understood the deeper currents involved. "Thank you," Tori said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you've figured out what you really want and had the courage to fight for it." 2 hours later, Tori stood outside her mother's apartment door, her overnight bag in one hand and her car keys in the other. She had been dreading this conversation since Dr. Martinez made the offer, but there was no avoiding it now. Serafina took one look at the bag and her expression hardened into familiar lines of disappointment and fear. "No," she said simply. "Whatever he's offering, whatever story he's told to get you back, the answer is no. Evangeline is sick, Mother. She's failing to thrive without proper care, and I'm the only one who can help her. There are other wet nurses. There are other solutions. This isn't about the baby. This is about him manipulating you through your guilt and your misplaced sense of responsibility." Tori set down her bag and faced her mother directly. "You're right that this isn't just about Evangeline. It's about me finally understanding that running away from love doesn't protect you from pain. It guarantees it. Victoria, don't do this. Don't go back to a situation that will only break your heart." "My heart is already broken, Mother. It's been broken for 3 weeks, ever since I let fear convince me that love wasn't worth fighting for." Tori's voice grew stronger with each word. "I'm not you, and Scott isn't Father. We have challenges to face, yes, but we also have something worth protecting. And what happens when he decides you're not worth the social complications? What happens when he meets someone more appropriate, someone his friends and family will accept?" The questions that had haunted Tori for weeks, the fears that had driven her away in the first place, suddenly seemed smaller than the regret that had been eating at her soul. "Then I'll deal with that heartbreak when it comes. But I won't create it preemptively by giving up before we've even tried." Serafina's face crumpled with the kind of pain that spoke of old wounds reopened. "I can't watch you go through what I went through. I can't stand by and see you destroyed by impossible dreams." "Then don't watch," Tori said gently, moving to embrace her mother. "But don't ask me to live your fears instead of my own hopes. Don't ask me to choose safety over the chance at real happiness." They held each other for a long moment, both crying for different reasons, Serafina for the daughter she was certain she was losing to heartbreak, Tori for the years of distance that had grown between them because of old pain. "If you get hurt," Serafina whispered fiercely, "if he breaks your heart the way your father broke mine, promise me you'll come home. Promise me you won't try to bear it alone." "I promise," Tori said, though privately she knew that Wisconsin had already become home in ways Chicago never could be again. The drive back to Scott's estate took 4 hours, 4 hours of second-guessing and nervous anticipation and growing certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, facing them was better than running from them. Tori had learned during her weeks away that love didn't become safer by being denied. It just became a wound that never healed. As she turned into the familiar driveway, Tori's heart clenched at the sight of Scott's house in the golden light of evening. Everything looked the same: the manicured lawns, the elegant architecture, the greenhouse where they had worked side by side planting dreams in soil. But she could sense the sadness that permeated the place like a gray fog. The front door opened before she could knock, and Tori found herself face to face with Scott for the first time in 3 weeks. The change in him was shocking. He had lost weight, his face was drawn with exhaustion and grief, and his eyes held the hollow look of a man who had been surviving rather than living. "You came," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. "I had to. When I heard about Evangeline." Tori's voice broke as she saw the pain in his eyes. "How is she?" "Dying by inches. She won't eat, won't sleep, cries constantly. 3 different pediatric specialists have examined her, and they all say the same thing. There's nothing medically wrong with her that a return to previous care patterns wouldn't solve." "And you? How are you?" Scott's laugh held no humor. "I'm not sleeping, not eating, not functioning. My business partner thinks I've lost my mind. My sister-in-law is threatening to petition for custody of Evangeline, and I spend most of my time staring at empty rooms and wondering how I was stupid enough to let you walk away." The raw honesty in his admission made Tori's chest tight with emotion. This was not manipulation or calculated appeal. This was a man who had been stripped bare by loss and was too exhausted to hide his wounds. "I didn't want to leave," she admitted quietly. "I was scared. Scared of judgment, scared of getting hurt, scared of not being enough for the life you offered. And now I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to stay." They stood in the doorway, staring at each other, 3 weeks of separation and doubt, dissolving in the face of need that went deeper than pride or fear. Whatever obstacles they would face, whatever battles they would have to fight, the simple truth was that they belonged together, not just for Evangeline's sake, but for their own. "Can I see her?" Tori asked. Scott stepped aside to let her enter, and together they climbed the stairs toward the nursery where everything had begun. With each step, Tori felt herself coming home to the only place she had ever truly belonged. Not just a house or a job, but a family that needed her as much as she needed them. The future might be uncertain, the path ahead filled with challenges she couldn't yet imagine, but Tori knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Chapter 9. Truth in Moonlight. Love's most dangerous moment comes not in its declaration, but in its acceptance. When 2 hearts finally stop running from what they both know to be true and stand naked in the moonlight of their own vulnerability. The nursery looked exactly as Tori had left it 3 weeks ago, but the baby lying listlessly in the crib bore little resemblance to the thriving infant she remembered. Evangeline had lost weight, her cheeks hollow and her skin pale with the grayish undertone that spoke of a body slowly giving up. But it was her eyes that broke Tori's heart, dull and unfocused, lacking the bright curiosity that had made her such a joy to care for. "Oh, sweetheart," Tori whispered, reaching into the crib to lift Evangeline with infinite gentleness. "What have we done to you?" The baby's response was immediate and heartbreaking. At the first touch of Tori's hands, Evangeline's eyes focused with desperate intensity, and she began making the soft sounds that had always preceded her most contented moments. Her tiny fists clutched at Tori's shirt with surprising strength, as if afraid this reunion might be another cruel dream. "She knows you're here," Scott said from the doorway, his voice thick with emotion. "She's been like this for weeks, listless and unresponsive. But the moment she heard your voice downstairs, she started moving." Tori settled into the familiar rocking chair, positioning Evangeline for nursing, with movements that felt like muscle memory. The baby latched immediately, her desperate hunger evident in the way she fed with single-minded focus. "How much weight has she lost?" 2 pounds. Dr. Morrison says that's catastrophic for a baby her size." Scott moved to his usual position in the window seat, maintaining the careful distance that had always been part of their ritual. He's never seen anything like it, a healthy baby literally losing the will to thrive because of emotional trauma. As Evangeline nursed, Tori could feel the baby's body relaxing for the first time in weeks, her breathing deepening into the rhythm of true contentment. But underneath her relief at Evangeline's response, Tori was acutely aware of Scott's presence, of the way he watched them with an expression caught between gratitude and something far more complex. "The wet nurse you hired," Tori said carefully. "What happened to her?" "I fired her after 2 days. Evangeline wouldn't feed, just screamed every time the woman tried to nurse her. It was like she knew it wasn't you and refused to accept the substitute. Babies form specific attachments. The scent, the heartbeat, the way you hold them. It all becomes part of their sense of safety." "Is that all it was? Just familiar scent and heartbeat?" The question held layers Tori wasn't ready to explore. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've been wondering for 3 weeks whether Evangeline's reaction was just about losing her primary caregiver, or whether she was responding to something deeper, something she sensed between us that made our separation feel like the destruction of her family." Tori's hand stilled on Evangeline's back. "Scott ... I know we agreed not to discuss this. I know you came back as a professional consultation only, but watching my daughter nearly die from grief has given me some perspective on what really matters." "And what's that?" "That some connections go deeper than practical arrangements. That some bonds can't be replicated or replaced, no matter how logical the substitution seems." Evangeline had finished nursing and fallen into the deep, peaceful sleep of a baby whose world had been restored to safety. Tori held her for several more minutes, reluctant to break the contact that had brought such immediate healing. "She'll need to feed every 2 hours for the next few days," Tori said finally, focusing on medical practicalities to avoid the emotional undercurrents. "Her stomach has probably shrunk from inadequate nutrition, so smaller, more frequent meals will help her regain weight safely." "Does that mean you're staying?" The hope in Scott's voice was almost unbearable. "For a few days, until she's stable and we can establish a transition plan to a new caregiver. And then I go back to Chicago and you find someone Evangeline can accept." Scott was quiet for so long that Tori looked up to find him staring at her with an expression of such profound sadness that her chest ached in response. "What if there is no one she can accept? What if you're not just her wet nurse, but her mother in every way that matters, except biology?" The words hit like lightning strikes, illuminating truths Tori had been afraid to acknowledge. She had bonded with Evangeline as completely as if the baby were her own, had felt the fierce protective love that transcended mere professional duty. And Evangeline had responded with the total trust that babies reserved for their primary attachment figures. "That's not possible," Tori said weakly. "I'm not her mother. Celestine was her mother. Celestine gave birth to her. But you've been the one loving her, nurturing her, singing to her, worrying about her. You've been the one she turns to for comfort, the one whose absence nearly killed her." Tori stood carefully and placed Evangeline in her crib, needing physical distance from the conversation that was stripping away every protective barrier she'd built. Biology matters, Scott. Legal parentage matters. I have no claim to Evangeline beyond the temporary arrangement we made. Claims can be changed. Legal parentage can be established through adoption. The suggestion hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they were ready to cross. Adoption would mean permanence, legal recognition of what had grown between Tori and Evangeline. It would also mean acknowledging that she and Scott were planning a future together, building something that went far beyond their current arrangement. "We need to take this one day at a time," Tori said carefully. "Focus on getting Evangeline healthy before we make any major decisions." Scott nodded, though his expression suggested he had already made his decision and was simply waiting for her to catch up. The next few days fell into a rhythm that felt both familiar and charged with new tension. Evangeline responded to Tori's return with miraculous speed, regaining weight and alertness, as if she had simply been waiting for her world to be restored to its proper order. But the careful boundaries that had once defined Tori and Scott's relationship had been shattered by separation and reunion, leaving them navigating new territory without maps or guidelines. It was on the third night, when Evangeline developed a fever that sent them both into protective overdrive, that the last walls between them finally crumbled. Tori had been checking on the baby every hour, monitoring her temperature and watching for signs of serious illness. At 2 in the morning, she found Scott already in the nursery, holding a restless Evangeline while taking her temperature with the digital thermometer. 102, he said quietly. "Should I call Dr. Morrison?" "Not yet. Babies spike fevers quickly, but they can also resolve just as fast. Let's try cooling measures first and see if we can bring it down naturally." They worked together through the small hours of the morning, taking turns holding Evangeline while the other prepared cool compresses, administered infant acetaminophen, and monitored her vital signs. There was something profoundly intimate about sharing the vigil, about the way they moved around each other with unconscious coordination, about the silent communication that passed between them as they worried over their child. By 4 in the morning, Evangeline's fever had broken, and she was sleeping peacefully in her crib. Tori and Scott found themselves alone in the kitchen, sharing coffee and the aftermath of shared crisis. "Thank you," Scott said quietly. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here tonight. You would have handled it perfectly. You're a good father, Scott." "I'm a terrified father who's been faking competence since the day she was born." Scott's smile was rueful. "Every decision feels monumental. Every symptom feels like a catastrophe. I keep waiting for someone to realize I have no idea what I'm doing and take her away from me." "Every parent feels that way. The fear means you care enough to do right by her." "Do I? Because letting you leave 3 weeks ago nearly cost her life. What kind of father puts his own pride above his child's well-being?" Tori studied his face in the soft kitchen lighting, seeing the guilt and self-doubt that had been eating at him since her departure. "You didn't let me leave, Scott. I chose to go. I chose to listen to fear instead of love, and that choice hurt all of us." "Love?" The word had slipped out before Tori could stop it, and now it hung between them like a confession neither had been ready to make. Scott's eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Tori," he said softly, moving closer until he could reach out and cup her face in his hands. "Tell me I'm not imagining this. Tell me you feel what I feel." The tenderness in his touch, the vulnerability in his voice, stripped away the last of her defenses. "I feel it," she whispered. "I've felt it since that first night in the greenhouse, maybe since the first moment I saw you watching me feed Evangeline." "Then why did you run? Why did you let your mother convince you to leave?" "Because I'm scared," Tori admitted, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm scared of not being enough for your world. Scared of the judgment we'll face, scared of loving you both so much that losing you would destroy me." Scott's thumbs traced across her cheekbones, wiping away tears that had been threatening for weeks. And I'm scared of not being worthy of what you're offering. Scared that grief damaged me so badly I can't love properly anymore. Scared that asking you to stay is selfish when you could have an easier life somewhere else. They stood in the pre-dawn darkness of the kitchen, holding each other's fears as gently as they had held his daughter through her fever, and Tori felt something fundamental shift in her chest. This wasn't the passionate declaration of romance novels or movies. This was the quiet recognition of two wounded souls who had found healing in each other's presence. "I love you," Scott said simply. "Not just for what you've done for Evangeline, not just because you appeared when we needed you most. I love your strength, your compassion, the way you sing off-key in the greenhouse and cry at children's movies. I love the woman you are when no one's watching, when you're just being human instead of perfect." "I love you too," Tori replied, the words feeling like a prayer and a promise combined. "I love your gentleness with Evangeline, the way you honor Celestine's memory while still being open to new love. I love that you were willing to fight the world for us, even when I wasn't brave enough to fight beside you." When Scott leaned down to kiss her, Tori met him halfway, their lips finding each other with the tender inevitability of two people who had finally stopped running from their hearts. The kiss was soft, questioning, filled with months of suppressed longing and the sweet relief of truth finally spoken. But as they broke apart, reality came flooding back. The complications that had driven them apart, the social barriers that would make their love a battleground, the practical difficulties that love alone couldn't solve. "This doesn't change the obstacles we face," Tori said quietly, though her hands remained tangled in Scott's hair. "Your world, my world, they're still different. People will still judge us, still question our motives, still make our relationship more difficult than it has to be. Then we'll face those obstacles together," Scott replied, his forehead resting against hers. "We'll prove them wrong one day at a time, one person at a time, until they have no choice but to accept what we know, that love doesn't follow their rules. And if we can't, if the pressure becomes too much, if it affects Evangeline's future or your business or our ability to be happy." Scott was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Then we'll face that too. But I won't give up on us before we've even tried. I won't let fear make decisions for love." As dawn began to break outside the kitchen windows, painting the sky in shades of hope and possibility, Tori felt her last reservations crumble in the face of Scott's unwavering certainty. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever battles they would have to fight, she finally understood that some love was worth the risk. "There's something I want to show you," Scott said quietly, taking her hand. "Something Celestine wrote before she died." He led her to his study, where he withdrew a leather-bound journal from his desk drawer. The pages fell open to an entry dated just days before Evangeline's birth, written in the careful script of a woman who knew her time was running short. "If something happens to me," Tori read aloud, "I want Scott to know that love isn't a finite resource. The heart doesn't become smaller when it loves deeply. It becomes larger, more capable of holding joy and hope and all the beautiful complications that make life worth living. I want him to find someone who will love Evangeline as fiercely as I do, someone who will bring music back into our house and laughter back into his eyes. I want him to be brave enough to let himself be loved again, completely and without reservation, because that's the greatest gift he can give our daughter, the knowledge that love survives even the worst losses." The words blurred as tears filled Tori's eyes, and she felt Celestine's blessing wash over them like absolution. This wasn't betrayal of the dead woman's memory. This was fulfillment of her deepest hopes for the family she'd had to leave behind. "She would have loved you," Scott said softly. She would have been grateful that you found us when we needed you most. Standing in the growing light of morning, surrounded by the evidence of one woman's generous heart and holding the promise of another's love, Tori finally understood that some stories didn't end with death. They transformed, taking new shapes while honoring what came before. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own tests of their commitment to each other and to the family they were creating. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary of truth finally spoken, they had found something worth fighting for. And that, Tori knew, was more than most people ever discovered in a lifetime of searching. Chapter 10. The Vow. On the morning when two broken hearts prepare to become whole, panic and joy walk hand in hand through gardens where roses bloom on the graves of old sorrows, and love learns to speak the language of forever. The white dress hung in the morning sunlight like a prayer made visible, its simple elegance a testament to the kind of wedding Tori had always dreamed of. Intimate, meaningful, focused on love rather than spectacle. 6 months had passed since that night in the kitchen when they had finally spoken the truth their hearts had been carrying. But now, 3 hours before their wedding ceremony in the restored greenhouse, Tori sat on the edge of her bed, feeling as if she might shatter from the weight of her own happiness. "You're having second thoughts," Evangeline observed from her playpen, where she was contentedly destroying board books with the determination of a 14-month-old who had discovered cause and effect. Tori smiled despite her anxiety. "You're very wise for someone who just learned to walk, sweet girl." As if summoned by the comment, Evangeline pulled herself up and took several confident steps along the playpen's edge, her blue eyes bright with concentration. "That's right, baby," Tori encouraged, "one step at a time." A soft knock interrupted her brooding, and Dr. Morrison's wife entered carrying steaming tea and wearing the knowing expression of a woman who had witnessed many pre-wedding panics. "Margaret," Tori said with genuine warmth. The older woman had become both friend and surrogate mother over the past months. "Thought you might need some chamomile," Margaret said, settling beside Tori, "and maybe some perspective." "I'm not having second thoughts about Scott," Tori said quickly. "It's just that happiness feels too good to be true." Tori's eyes filled with tears. "Hope died in my arms, Margaret. My marriage fell apart, and I've spent years learning not to want things too much, because wanting hurts when you lose them. And now you have everything you never dared to dream of, and it terrifies you." Margaret was quiet for several minutes, watching Evangeline practice walking with determined focus. "Do you know how Scott and Celestine met?" Margaret asked finally. Tori shook her head. She was working as a volunteer grief counselor at the hospital where his mother was dying. Scott was 26, completely lost. Celestine was 24 and dealing with her own loss. Her father had died the year before. Margaret's smile was soft with memory. They fell in love while teaching each other that tragedy doesn't disqualify you from happiness, that surviving loss makes you more capable of appreciating love, not less deserving of it. She told him that love isn't a reward for good behavior. It's a gift that appears when hearts are open enough to receive it, often after sorrow when we think we're too broken to be loved. Tori felt her chest tighten with recognition. Hope's death and Marcus's abandonment hadn't disqualified her from happiness. They had prepared her to recognize and cherish the love that came after. "I keep thinking about Hope," Tori admitted quietly, "about whether loving Evangeline so completely dishonors her memory. Do you think Hope would want you to spend your life grieving instead of loving?" The question hit like a gentle revelation. Tori imagined her daughter as she would have been, walking, talking, filling the world with laughter. The Hope in her imagination was generous and loving, happy that her mother had found healing and joy. "She would want me to be happy," Tori said softly. "She would want Evangeline to have a mother who loved her completely." And she would want you to understand that loving Evangeline doesn't replace the love you had for Hope. It expands it. Love multiplies, Tori. It doesn't divide. A commotion from the playpen made them look over to see Evangeline standing in the center, no longer holding the bars. The baby swayed but remained upright, her face bright with delight. "Look at you, brave girl," Tori exclaimed, kneeling beside the playpen. "You let go and trusted yourself to stand." Evangeline took one tentative step forward, then another, walking with wobbling determination. "Her first independent steps," Margaret said softly, "on her parents' wedding day." The word parents sent warmth flooding through Tori's chest. The adoption papers had been finalized 3 weeks ago. "I should go find Scott," Tori said, her anxiety transforming into anticipation. "Last I saw, he was in the greenhouse looking almost as nervous as you feel." Tori made her way through the gardens to the greenhouse, where she found Scott standing among the roses they had planted together, his hands shaking as he adjusted chairs for their small ceremony. "Having second thoughts?" she asked gently. Scott turned, his face lighting up despite the worry in his eyes. "Not about you. Never about you. But about whether I deserve this much happiness after everything that's happened. Celestine should be here to see Evangeline take her first steps, to watch her grow up. Instead, I'm getting a second chance while she's gone forever." Tori moved closer. "Do you think Celestine would want you to spend your life alone? Would she want Evangeline to grow up without a mother? Of course not. But knowing what she would want and feeling worthy of it are different things." Tori reached out to take his hands, steadying them. "Scott, do you remember what you told me about love not being a finite resource? That was Celestine's wisdom, not mine. No, it became your wisdom when you chose to believe it, when you chose to open your heart again despite the risk." Tori's voice grew stronger. "We're not replacing the love we lost. We're building something new that honors what came before." Scott's eyes searched her face. "Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure this is what you want? I'm sure that hope led me to Evangeline, and Evangeline led me to you. I'm sure that Celestine's love was generous enough to want you to be happy. I'm sure that the family we're creating celebrates what love can build from the ashes of sorrow." They stood among the roses, holding each other's hands in fears, and Tori felt the last of her resistance crumble. "Besides," she added with a smile, "Evangeline took her first independent steps this morning. She's ready to walk toward our future." Scott's laugh was bright with joy and relief. "She did? Really? 5 wobbly steps, looking proud as a peacock. Children know when their family is complete and secure." "Then let's give her the security she deserves," Scott said, lifting Tori's hands to his lips. "Let's stop being afraid of happiness and start building the life we've all been waiting for." 3 hours later, as the sun filled the greenhouse with golden light, Tori walked down an aisle of rose petals, wearing her simple white dress and carrying a bouquet of herbs from their garden. 20 people witnessed their exchange of vows: Dr. Morrison and Margaret, close friends, and Scott's sister who had flown in from Seattle. But it was Evangeline who stole the show, toddling between Tori and Scott during the ceremony with newfound confidence, as if she understood that this moment was making official what had been true in her heart for months. They exchanged rings and vows they had written themselves, promising to honor their lost loves while building new dreams. "I promise to love Evangeline as if she were born from my own body," Tori said, her voice clear and strong. "And to honor Celestine's memory by being the mother she would want her daughter to have." "I promise to cherish the love you've given us both," Scott replied, "and to prove every day that second chances aren't consolation prizes, but precious gifts that wise hearts recognize and protect." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, when Scott kissed her with the tender passion of a man who had learned not to take love for granted, Tori felt the presence of those they had lost like a blessing rather than a shadow. Hope and Celestine weren't gone. They lived on in the love that had brought their families together, in the laughter that filled spaces once empty with grief, in the roses that bloomed where tears had once watered barren ground. 1 year later, on a morning when spring rain drummed against the greenhouse roof, Tori sat in the rocking chair nursing their son James, while Scott played the completed lullaby on the piano. Evangeline, now a confident 2-year-old, sang along in her clear voice. "Mama's feeding James," Evangeline announced with the authority of an older sister. "And Daddy's playing our song, and everybody's happy." "Everybody's happy," Tori agreed, looking around at the family they had built from loss and hope and love that refused to be contained by conventional boundaries. Outside, the gardens they had restored together bloomed in abundance. It was a garden that honored the past while nurturing the future, where memory and hope intertwined like climbing roses, reaching toward the light. As James finished nursing and settled into sleep against her chest, Tori felt the deep contentment of a woman who had learned that love's greatest triumph isn't avoiding loss, but building something beautiful in its aftermath. They had proven that hearts broken by sorrow could still expand to hold joy, that families could be built from the most unlikely foundations, that love, real, deep, transformative love, was always worth the risk. And in the music-filled warmth of their greenhouse sanctuary, surrounded by the evidence of life's resilience and grace, Tori finally understood what Celestine had known all along, that love doesn't end with death. It just finds new ways to bloom.